Alright, let's start by resetting to the default. So this is the basic pyramid settings. And the way I like it is for pyramid, which is the how the pyramid listens to external MIDI messages. We'll put it to channel 2, and incoming notes I want them to be on the keypad directly so I can program chords. I don't really use the live mode of the built-in chords anyway. So transpose note is fine as the default. Omni mode, I'm going to keep it as the multi-track default, so every channel coming in gets mapped to the current track, active track. And most of these settings, so we're not ignoring anything, so we want to sort of receive everything, and then we're going to keep like that. So that's for the MIDI settings in. On a MIDI out, so the way I like to work, I use all three interfaces, MIDI A, MIDI B, and the USB. So on MIDI A, I want to send the clock. I also want to send the transport message, so start stop, and same thing for MIDI B. Send and start stop, and also the USB. Since I'm using the USB interface as well, I want to send the clock and also start stop message. And when the pyramid is stopped, I also want to send the clock, right? So all the devices are receiving clock signal. So that's a MIDI out. I don't actually use the CV, or I don't use the pedal at all, but sometimes I use CV. So CV in, I don't use at all. So we can keep that as that, which is fine. CV out. So the basic sort of 2-volt note is C2. I usually keep all the sort of default thing. I didn't have to calibrate the pyramid to any of my device yet. One thing I want to change is let's assign the envelope signal, which is this one over here, to map to the velocity, which I think is the most useful setting. Then sync is off, and since I don't have a pedal plugged in, I'm not using sort of any of the pedal settings. So the most important part is the miscellaneous settings here, which is a lot of things I change for performance reason. So live looper is not something I used, so I'll keep it off. The signature, which is a choice between polyrhythms and PolyMeters, I set to PolyMeters. Polyrhythms is the one where all the notes have a different length, but the measure is always the same. PolyMeters, the measure can be a different length, but the quarter note is always a quarter note, right? So this is the one if you're used to a step sequencer and you want to have 15 steps versus 16 steps to have that sort of offset. That's the setting that you want to have. Double tap mode, I find glide is more useful. It's easy for me to set the velocities to what I want. Record countdown, we can keep the 1 bar. So one of my synthesizers is a general MIDI synth, so I actually like to use that one for the metronome, and it's on USB channel 10, right? Channel 10 is the drum machine, or the drums general MIDI channel, and the note is the rim shot, which I believe is C2. There it is, C2 sharp. That's the rim shot on general MIDI. So step learn, we want to learn the notes. I have a keyboard and I'll program the chords and notes directly using that. Choices we have is on and off. Edit should be on. CC assigns, I don't really record live CC from external device. I'll do it directly from mapping the encoders on the pyramid. Playpad is kind of fun. I usually record my tracks by performing them live. So there's a couple of modes. So what happens when you press play and you press play again? So one of them is basically first play is play, and then the second one is pause. I find that's not quite as useful. Play restart is kind of it basically gives you that sort of restart resync point of view, and then mute basically just sort of mutes the sequencer, but the internal clock is still running. So restart is what I like to have here. So these are the ones I find very important. So track mute delay. So when you mute and unmute track, I want it to not follow the performance mode, but I want it to be instantaneous, right? So when mute and unmute a track, let's do it instantly. When we change a pattern, I'd like it to be changing on the next available beat. Auto patterns, I keep off because I like to control when I create a new pattern or not. The other option is to have it automatically create a bunch of empty patterns whenever you switch the sequence. The default track, so playback mode for default track, free basically will sync internally all the time, and then when you mute and unmute, nothing happens. Relash basically resets the track when you unmute it, and then trigger is one shot. So by default, we're going to keep the free. Length 1 bar on a 4x4 with the zoom. So this is the one I always change. So default performance. So when you switch from a sequence to another, I usually set it to 4 bars. I'll change it on a track on a song by song basis, but usually chord progression are usually 4, 6, or 8 bars or something like that. Play has started up. We'll find to leave it like that. Programming the encoders, rotating click is fine for me. Touchpad is on. USB is obviously on, and I don't really like the auto load, but I kind of like the little current marker LEDs to know where I am in the song. So that's for the miscellaneous setting. And that sort of works on. The sort of last sort of menu here is the info menu. That's actually useful to sort of debug what's going on. So you'll see inputs coming in. What's the sort of analog in, analog out? So that's the CV gate in and out. MIDI in, MIDI out channel. So you see we're sending clock on MIDI out A. We're sending the clock on B, and we're also sending the clock on USB. I don't really have sort of other channels, so nothing's happening. For example, if I do like that. Okay. So now I have my default settings set the way I want them. I'm going to save them. So save settings will commit the settings to memory, and now every news track is going to have those settings. So we can verify that by turning the pyramid off and turning it back on. See what happens. So let's go to settings, MIDI in, and all my settings are here. There you go. So that's a quick overview of how I like to set up the pyramid.